Well, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see your fresh faces. Who was at the awards last night? Hands in the air? Not many of you. Okay. Well, now we know the contingent we have. This is we had a fantastic evening last night, and it was a wonderful evening for all the award winners. And it's great to be here, kicking off day 2 with somebody who I count as a close friend, and somebody I have known for over 20 years.
Wow.
I just,
you were very young. You were.
There's an interesting backstory. I was 21 years old, and I'd probably been turned down by 100 investors in the UK. And that was in 1996. Netscape had just gone public, or was about to go public. And really, there was no venture scene in the UK at all. And through a number of introductions, I finally met Esther. And actually, our next speaker after this, which is Herman Hauser.
Yes.
And Herman and Esther became my first 2 angel investors 22 years ago, which was a wonderful thing and the start of my own journey. So I'm very, very, very grateful for that. It's wonderful to have you here today and have an opportunity to hear your views on this incredible emerging world that we've got in front of us. Now you, through your work with Release 1.0 and PC Forum, and most recently the Road to Wellville, but you've seen this incredible journey through the PC revolution and obviously most recently coming up to artificial intelligence. It would be amazing to get your perspective on what that journey's looked like.
Yeah. So I'll do this in kind of an AI context. First, I had a conference called PC Forum, which began as Personal Computer Forum back in 1982 when I bought it from Ben Rosen. And it ended in 2007 as PC Forum Platforms for Communication. So all these things keep moving. When I started with AI, it was Danny Hillis and thinking machines and natural language processing. And I actually saw Danny last week. He's building the clock of the long now for Jeff Bezos.
Of course, yeah.
And the other memorable one was Doug Lennett, who was doing Psych, which was a sort of object-oriented structured database of all the world's knowledge. And I wrote about it for the newsletter. And he was actually quite pleased with the article, and he called me up and said, "Would you like a job entering knowledge?" Because, of course, the only way to put all the information in at that time, because there wasn't information online, was for these basically clerks and grad students to enter all the information by hand. So I politely refused. But what's interesting is, now so we had those 2 things, and then we had expert systems, which were basically logic models and yes, no, and if-thens and that kind of stuff. And what they quickly discovered was when they called them expert systems, nobody wanted to use them because they were the experts. So then they started calling them the doctor's assistant or the assistant X, and then they became somewhat popular. But there was still the problem of garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
And I would say, fast forward to now, we've got all these, they're basically recognizer categorization systems, neural nets. I mean, that's slight overstatement, but it's sort of like, so now I know this is an X, and if it's not an X, they tend not to fail gently.
They fail hard.
Yeah, and
right.
So it's either, it's a banana or it's a tree trunk, or, I don't know what. But now you know it's an X, then what do you do? I mean, and especially dealing with uncertainty, and there's a lot of stuff around medicine, which, it kind of matters. What we need, I think, is to go back more to models. So most of the image recognition systems work in 2D. And if this is an analogy for a much broader set of problems, but if the AI doesn't understand the construction of the cat, the 4 legs, if the legs are going in the wrong direction, they might not recognize it as a cat because they don't actually have a model of how a cat moves. And again, there's all these sort of local domain specific systems that know what it means to pour water, or what it means to turn something upside down. But it's really not being, this is the problem. The world doesn't have edges. It just...
It's a continuum.
Yeah.
It's interesting, that concept of sense or common sense is clearly not there yet.
Yeah, and that's because it's common, but it takes years and years to acquire it with an incredibly powerful knowledge acquisition tool. Yeah, and then there's all the stuff about grammar and how much is actually hardwired.
So let me ask you, in this whole area of classifiers or pattern recognition, what are the projects that you've been most enamored by or most excited by?
Well, I mean, there's one I can't talk about that I'm an investor in. There's another interesting one called Turban.ai that I am an investor in. They're Hungarian, and a whole bunch of really smart, cheap PhDs. So a lot of the medical work, again, is sort of, it's fundamentally statistical and pattern recognition.
And what are they doing? What problem are
They have a model, or I mean, multiple models. A lot of data, but about rules rather than just data of how different molecules interact and how one thing attaches to another. This is cells and drugs and so forth. And so they're working with a bunch of respectable pharmas. The initial work is simply going through all these kind of leftover drugs. This drug didn't work on sacroiliac pain or something.
Right.
Let's see if it works on anything else. And they look at the structure of it and they say, oh, it has these things that work with those receptors. Let's try it on this condition.
So they're picking up work that's a whole bunch of work that's already been done and then finding a way to repurpose
the drug
that
may already have been tested for toxicity or something.
Fantastic.
I mean, long run, obviously, you get to, gee, we could figure out what's needed and then go hunt for it.
And going back to your point about models and the need to introduce models, do you see anybody doing that? Is that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's Turban, there's this other company I'm talking about, and I'm sure there's lots of, again, kind of domain-specific, probably various kinds of diseases. There's a lot about metabolic pathways people are working on, and almost anything that's like logistics systems. That particular area fascinates me. You can optimize something so much that when it doesn't work, again, it falls apart. Everybody who's ever watched a couple of flights get canceled and then can't get another flight for 3 days.
Oh my God.
Knows you need some slack in the system.
Yeah.
So how much slack? And can you, that's very much rule-based. Can you, let's face it, you're going to cancel the 20-person flight to East Anglia over the 200-person flight to London.
We did a little look into that space. There's actually some really interesting companies doing the catch-up optimization. So when there is a delay or a storm system, they work out automatically what they need to do in terms of scheduling new flights and canceling flights, whatever, in order to catch the system up, because that's a tough problem to solve.
I hope they sell it to United Airlines sometime soon.
So the technology obviously has come a long way, and you've been part of that journey. It's still got a way to go.
Yes.
It's still got a way to go. But I think one of the things that's been a theme of this conference is how do we put the right foundations in place going forward? There's some people that feel that the internet kind of happened a little fast and we were super enthusiasts and maybe we didn't think all of it through. Of course we didn't. But as we go into this AI, blockchain, and all the other wonderful things emerging now, there are some pretty big ethical questions that need to be answered. Have you spent time thinking about those?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, just one other thing we need much better is just knowledge representation standards, so that when you go looking at data, it's just easier to interoperate. So everybody talks about the ethics of AI, and it doesn't have any. Let's get real.
The AI doesn't.
Yeah. We have ethics, and we should put them into our AI. But then you get to the big question. fundamentally, this problem is not new. It's who gets to decide what the rules are. And we haven't done it that well. I mean, right now, the thing that implements ethics is government. Now think how effective we've been at getting government to implement our ethics. It often implements them badly, or in the United States, it just sort of says, we don't really have ethics around healthcare. We'll just kind of let the market and reality decide who gets treated and who doesn't. And I mean, the one thing that AI will do, it will make our ethics become more visible, because now we need to have a computer decide whether this person gets treated, and we look at the results and we say, oh my God, the rich people are, somehow they have better results when they get treated for cancer, and they have better results when they give birth. And being poor means being unhealthy. And it's our ethics that are being reflected back to us. The AI discovers them and makes them clear, but now we still have the problem of who gets to vote, and do the results apply to everybody? Do they apply differentially? Do we actually want everybody to have the same quality of health care?
And it's going to vary country by country. I mean, who's ethics?
Well, it's going to vary system by system. This is the problem. I mean, in a country, you have different points of view on these questions. And, IBM versus HP, or, the one place where I think we may be successful is if you're going to have autonomous vehicles, they all need to follow the same rules, because then they'll be predictable to one another, and we actually will have this wonderful, almost accident-free world, except for crazy pedestrians. And one question is, how do you handle the famous pedestrians versus the car owner question? And again, the requirement to program the AI makes those ethics visible to us, but it doesn't help us resolve the conflicts between different parties over which ethics rules should be put in there.
Should go forward.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's fascinating that finally having to write down our rules forces us to actually think about what our rules are.
Yeah.
It's a little scary, because it's like looking in the mirror in the morning.
Yes. The mirror analogy. Thank you, Robert Hercock, among others.
Yeah, but I think it's we've heard it described as precision ethics, because you're having to actually go down to the detail and kind of codify it almost.
Precision, yeah, but precision is usually meant around individualized, and this is precisely the opposite. It's sort of blanket, but you get the colliding blankets, if you like, which is not a very good analogy. But
now, you were chair of ICANN.
Yeah.
That was an interesting organization trying to set standards. What is the organization that would put those kind of rules in place? Because, at one end you've got the UN, at the other end you've got incredible work that's going on. I mean, we heard from the guys at the Lever Hume Institute yesterday, amongst many others who are spending, serious time thinking these things through. But that's happening in every country around the world. And how do we bring that together and achieve what you're describing?
Well, first, I do not consider ICANN a model of how to do it.
Okay.
Or how to do it well. It had a lot of challenges, including how it was created. It was an immaculate conception, in quotes, that was actually created by the EU and the US. It had no budget. And
just for those who don't know who ICANN is. Yeah.
Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. It still exists. And it's basically, it was the governing body of the domain name and IP address system, and it still exists. Two things to be said. I'm aware of being quotable, but basically, it's become something of a protection racket, that whole business. The selling and assignment of domain names and the creation of new top-level domains, and a lot of people are getting rich. So they may be collecting more money than they deserve, but at least mostly they're taking our money, they're not taking our words. And that is extremely important. I don't mind losing a bit of money as long as I have my freedom of speech. It's the problem with ICANN, as would be the problem with something like that, dealing with, quote, AI ethics. Ethics it's not AI or not AI, it's ethics. The people who care about what ICANN does are a small subset of people who basically buy and sell domain names, and a few governments who think they can use the domain name system to shut people up, and just, they can. I mean, they can cut off certain IP addresses or fool around with the system. But the people who are affected, it's such a broad population, and their interest in the domain name. How many people actually knew the name of ICANN? Okay, well, you're an extremely literate group. You know, but how many of you voted in ICANN's last at-large election? Okay, there we go. They knew a little bit about it, but it wasn't their core interest.
Sure.
And so you get basically insider control. With AI ethics, AI/ethics, it's probably a much larger population, but you still end up with the same mess. So it's a fundamentally difficult problem. And just one other point of interest right now, ICANN and the GDPR are on two sides of this issue of the GDPR says you should be able to have your who is information, who controls the domain name, be kept a secret. And ICANN, I think, properly says if you have enough power that you own a domain name that people can visit, you have an obligation to at least be reachable so that they can, worst case, contact you because your website is doing something strange. And frankly, you know, individuals deserve privacy. I don't think corporations or other entities do, by and large.
So I know we're going to run out of time soon, but I was just going to ask one question. What if, in thinking about how we create an international discussion body, whatever it would be, is there one lesson we could learn from ICANN to think about that going forward? Don't do it, do it, we have to do it.
We have to do it, but we have to do it better.
Yeah.
And, you know, end of, I wish I could sit here and explain how to do it.
Long conversation.
But it does require transparency in one form or other is the most important thing. Transparency around ethics, around the rules, around how the rules get set, and around how the rules can be changed.
So there are two other things I wanted to touch on. Okay. On your most recent project, The Road to Wellville.
Way to Wellville.
Way to Wellville, sorry. Which is I saw described, or a quote from you saying we should think of health as an economic asset, which I thought was just a wonderful statement. But also, you know, I wanted to talk about your perspective on how society changes with the introduction of AI, and what the future of work and our sense of purpose looks like.
So, Way to Wellville is fundamentally the notion that we don't need no stinking AI to know that we need to raise our children to be happy and secure, and that will make them into adults who are able to not just know what it means to eat right, which we all do, but how many of you ate croissant this morning? And all kinds of other things with jelly and jams and so forth. It's applying this knowledge. And for that, I mean, I won't go into a long thing, but it's a 10-year project, ends in 2024. And what I've decided that you will resonate with, that the most important thing is a good training set for babies' brains. In other words, if you do prenatal care and the first 3 or 4 years of life properly, the other problems become minor. People have the sense of agency, the sense of long-term thinking and of control to manage their own lives effectively. And so much of our world's global sickening is due to human nature and to short-term gratification, whether it's drugs or cell phones or bad food or bad behavior. And you know, the mental health problems, again, this loneliness that was being discussed, a lot of that is due to not having felt secure and nurtured when you're a baby. And we're trying to change that, not by putting all the parents into training. And that's the real challenge we have. How do you reach people? One way is through diabetes prevention programs, through schools, through making sure that institutions in general understand better how to deal with people. I mean, to some extent, I'd rather have a good chat bot than a dismissive policemen or stuff like that. But I'd really rather have human beings because we are analog, we're chemical. We love our mother's pheromones, and that's what makes all the difference. Final, I don't know if we want to do the work thing.
Yeah, we should, absolutely.
So I have a slide. Could you please put up the slide? It's a very simple slide, and it's just talking about work, and it's why I have doubts about universal basic income. People need purpose, and I went to Russia starting in 1989, and I saw what it was like when people did work they thought was pretty useless. It just destroyed them. The men, so many of them became alcoholics. The women had purpose. Their purpose was to raise a family. It was to take the money that their husbands earned and that they earned and stand online and turn that money into food for their families. So as I think about work, it requires, people need both to be paid so they can live, but they also need to feel they're doing something meaningful. That doesn't necessarily mean they need to be paid. It may be care for a loved one. It may be being an artist. But if you don't have both the money and the purpose, you're going to end up in the category of shit work or jail. And that's the big problem we need to solve, how to elevate humans, give them dignity, and give them purpose.
And any thoughts on how we're going to do that? If it's not, I mean, so it's a universal basic income that has a lot of criticism, but there's also been some quite extraordinary successes actually in Africa and India as two examples, for different reasons actually, not necessarily reasons that would be so evident here. And then there's the conditional basic income, which is this idea that if you're meeting some condition, like you're at school or you're learning, you're retraining yourself. You'll continue
the
to have an
learning,
income.
earning, serving, projection. I mean, it's fine to be paid if you live in a community that gives you that sense of purpose. I mean, as I said, you don't necessarily need to be paid to get that purpose, and you don't necessarily need to do paid work, but somehow the society needs to provide both of them. Somehow you need to be able to get an income, and somehow you need to feel that the community needs you. Otherwise, you're just an audience, and if you walk out, nobody notices. But if you're part of a community, your presence is noted, and you have impact.
Yeah, you're valued.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Well,
I hope we had some impact.
Absolutely. Esther, it's so nice to have a chance to talk to you.
Great.